Welcome back, viewers at home. You're joining us right here on Prime Live, about to really dissect a very important conversation that really affects us at all in general. And I think my guest tonight, from academia to activism, Candice's unwavering commitment to menstrual justice and feminist principles continues to shine a powerful light on the realities faced by menstruators across communities. Candice, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, for viewers who are hearing about the Minister of Menstruation for the first time, can you take us through the journey that really led you to now, coining yourself as Minister of Menstruation?
Yeah, every time I hear that title, I just beam with so much pride because it carries so much relevance in society. It actually started as a joke between a really good friend of mine who saw how passionate I was about menstrual health, but it stuck. And honestly, I leaned into it because I realized something important. If our actual ministers or politicians won't talk about periods, then someone has to. My journey began in high school, where periods were spoken about in whispers, but my first period actually started at the age of 10. There was shame, there was hiding, pads up your sleeve or in your under your arm. There was a fear of staining your skirt or being judged at. And I thought, why are we so embarrassed about something half of the world, particularly in specifically 50% of the world experiences? But I didn't necessarily have the words or the empowerment back then to speak as open as I do now.
Mhm.
It wasn't until I'd started doing my master's degree that I started diving into the politics of menstruation and realizing the actual cost of menstruation, especially in purchasing the period products, looking at the policies, the silence, the lack of representation. And I just realized that there was a major, major injustice here. And that really sparked the inception of my NGO Curate, where we make talking about menstrual health fun and accessible and empowering. And we've impacted over 10,000 young people since 2019. And for me, yeah, I think outside of that, just it's really about just normalizing menstrual health and allowing people to remove the fear and the shame and the stigma associated around a natural biological function. Yeah.
Speaking on the shame and stigma, I want to know what do you or how do you go about tackling some of the entrenched stigmas and some of the discriminatory speeches that we hear around our friends, around our communities, even as you're saying, some institutions. And how do you then go about, tackling conversations that really get rid away of some of these stigmas, in especially in communities the way the idea of even saying period is so taboo.
Yeah, I think we are conditioned to associate menstruation with shame. And it's really through how we speak to young girls in particular when they first have their period. There's often a time where we're saying, when you have your period, make sure that no one sees or no one
Mm,
knows. And that really is such an isolating experience. Outside of the fact that you are experiencing your uterine lining shedding and you're
mhm.
experiencing all these other symptoms, to experience that anxiety and isolation on top of that is really something that compounds. And I just feel like we need to start with conversation, not a lecture, not a one-off conversation. It's a matter of really building these safe spaces and creating a real open dialogue. And parents really have the responsibility in doing that. I think there's often an assumption that it's your teachers that will provide the education to menstrual health, but it really just covers the basics of what happens every 21 to 35 days. But it doesn't really showcase the importance of including boys in the conversation, talking about the mental health aspect, talking about the self-care aspect. And I think parents and guardians play a major role in establishing those period positive safe spaces. So there's a saying I live by where I say shame cannot survive being spoken. And that's what we're doing, right? We're breaking the silence one conversation at a time. And I really just believe that the taboos can be unpacked through education.
Hmm. Now you spoke about something quite interesting, bringing the boy child or the boys into the conversation, because most of us, we knew whenever the conversation went on, any male figure was like really asked to leave the room and so forth. So what positive comes from including the male gender into the conversation?
Well, these boys become male adults who ultimately will become fathers or employees to people who menstruate, or employers to people with people who menstruate. And so they have a role in really building a period positive world. And I think oftentimes when I engage with boys, there's this natural curiosity to want to learn and engage. But I think people often assume that boys always just want to ridicule and shame people who menstruate, but they're coming from the place of the unknown. So when
Mm,
we're meeting them halfway with compassion and education to empower them, and also do it in a way that says you have a responsibility in not just being a menstrual ally, but also being a good friend, a good partner,
mm,
showing up when it matters, that really changes the way menstruation is depicted, especially for men. And I think, especially if teachers take the responsibility in not separating girls and boys, especially in these conversations,
mm,
you'll find that the boys will want to actually help. I've seen many situations where boys will be like, oh, I've noticed that, for instance, my sister isn't feeling that great and she stained her clothes. What is it that what can I do to help? There's always just
mm,
willingness to help. And I think that's just speaking to the coreness of humanity. But if we are deliberately isolating boys from these conversations, then as they grow up, they will then also deliberately exclude themselves from these conversations and ultimately assume that they don't have a responsibility. So it's
mm.
really fundamental that we include them in these conversations. And even with Curate, we've launched a campaign called Dads for Pads, where we're seeking to educate fathers in these conversations because they also play a role in building a period positive world, not only for their girl child, but for their boy child too.
Candice, I have a curiosity of my own, and I'm hoping you'll help me unpack my curiosity in terms of, would you say that there is a relationship between feminism and menstrual equity? If so, how do they even intersect?
Yeah, this is such an academic question, but I love it because I think people often don't see the clear connection between how period poverty is a driver of gender inequality. And so eradicating period poverty ultimately is instilling gender equality, which is the core of feminism. So, what I mean by that is that with period poverty, when we see individuals who menstruate not having the ability to afford menstrual products, that holds them back from being able to go to school, from being able to go about their social activities. And I think this ultimately also has an impact on their ability to relate with themselves. So there's a dignity issue that comes to the conversation around period poverty. But it's not just only the access to period products, it's also the intersectional issue of access to healthcare. Issue of access to clean, safe sanitation, and also access to education. So this becomes interconnected to human rights. And I always say this, like, menstrual rights are human rights. And so when we are speaking about ensuring that we are eradicating period poverty, we're not only just providing dignity and access to care, but we're also ensuring that one who menstruates has their human rights achieved. So it is really interconnected within feminism and gender equality. But I always just say this, when I say it as a human rights issue, it ultimately takes it more, there's more seriousness to the conversation because the implications are really intense if we're allowing period poverty to continue. Yeah.
Dear Honorable Member Candice, Minister Candice, Minister of Period in that sense, or menstruation, if I could say so. Seeing that you're very outspoken with the, concepts of, being inclusive in terms of education around menstrual health, what are the key components that should be put or be part of the curriculum itself?
Mm. Um, the theme for Menstrual Hygiene Day on Wednesday, which is a globally recognized day, is Together for a Period Friendly World, right? And so, if we want to build a period friendly world, we need to start with ensuring that kids are taught menstrual health in an empowering and open way, not in a way that's consequential or in a way that is scary, but in a way that really fosters this period friendly world. I also say that with menstrual education, it needs to be comprehensive and it needs to be accurate because most of the time these taboos come from a place of not really having the full information. Many young people that I speak to always carry these myths that you can't get pregnant on your period or menstrual blood is dirty, and this lack of knowledge causes the cycle of silence to continue, right? So we need to start off there by ensuring that the menstrual education is comprehensive and it's accurate, but it's
Mm,
also open and empowering.
mm,
I also think that people wait too late to have the conversation around menstrual health. They often wait until the period happens, which often would be average age around 13. But some young people start, some young girls in particular start their periods at the age as of 8, right?
mm,
So it's really important that we have these conversations that prepare them for the stages of puberty, because menstruation
mm.
is the last stage of puberty. And again, this conversation isn't built around fear or shame, but it is really ensuring that they are informed and that they're prepared. Because when you have a prepared child that they are ready for anything, they'll feel empowered and
Yeah.
confident to go through the inevitable, which is growing up. But then I also believe that it needs to be inclusive. So, like I mentioned earlier, we can't just have menstrual education that is steered towards the girl child only.
Mm,
I think it's really important that boys are included in this conversation, and boys do go through puberty as well.
yeah.
So, if it is centered in a way in saying this is part of growing up, this is part of the transition from childhood to adulthood, I do believe that we can have these conversations to be empowering and inclusive for the boy child. And I think it just really is about respect, understanding, and just really building this period friendly world. And it's not that difficult to do. Yeah.
Candice, without running the risk of having you repeat yourself about this very, important conversation around menstruation, I want to ask you to just unpack an idea that you shared in your previous conversation that you
Mm.
said menstrual justice is intersectional justice, especially for, menstruators who are coming from marginalized communities.
Mm. So we always have to, when we're thinking about envisioning menstrual equity or menstrual justice, we always need to ensure that we never leave anyone behind,
Mm,
right? So when we think of menstruation, we often depict or we would envision someone who's able bodied who
mm,
menstruates. But there are people who are disabled to menstruate, and we need to ensure that there are policies that not even also just policies but conversations that cater to be inclusive towards that. And I do believe that there needs to be more platforms, more conversations for people with disabilities who menstruate to share their obstacles, so that we as society can rally together and
mm,
just really eradicate this issue. I also feel that it is also intersectional when you are seeing it in humanitarian crises, right? So you can imagine if your country is going through a very difficult time of conflict, and now you're having to not only worry about protecting yourself, but also
mm,
manage your menstrual blood, right? So there is that intersectional crisis that is often not really covered, because we're only speaking about period poverty from the aspect of ensure a girl child goes to school by ensuring that she has access to the period products. But we're not seeing how menstruation can exist in different contexts, especially in humanitarian crises where people are relying for access to aid. And oftentimes that aid doesn't have access to the menstrual products that are required. So within menstrual health academia, we're not just only lobbying for the eradication of period poverty and schooling, but we're also saying that we need to be aware of how period poverty can exist in different settings, especially in work settings, right? There are people who are lobbying for menstrual health leave to ensure that they can take off menstrual or paid leave on their period, especially when they have conditions. But there's also these calls, especially in humanitarian crisis, to say we need to ensure that people have access to menstrual products that work within their situations. So I think from a global perspective, the data does say that from an educational perspective, 1 in 10 African girls miss out on school because of their period. And that can equate to easily fifty days of the school year. But then what happens when the girl leaves the school setting? Her period is still occurring, period poverty
mm.
still occurs. So we need to ensure that we're providing solutions for each and every scenario.
And the worst part is when the child themselves do not understand, menstruation itself, they can really, as you mentioned, it can take them to a very dark place. And I think maybe that's also a leading factor why certain young females tend to drop out of school because they feel like, having to catch up. I mean, this is something we're having a conversation about, missing 2 days of work. You come back, you feel like there's a whole lot that was done in your absentia. So you can imagine with school curriculums, they have how many subjects, and missing 1 day means you've missed how many subjects in that day in particular. But this is quite insightful. And just to find out more on, or rather about our Minister of Menstruation, what would you say are some of the challenges that you have encountered in your journey of advocating, against period poverty. And what would you say are some of the milestones that really kept you, persevering through and pushing through because you understood that this is not for me alone, it's not for my future daughter, it's not for my sister alone?
Mm. Yeah, the period poverty can be a tongue twister sometimes. But I do think it is such a interesting industry that I find myself, and like the intersection of activism and academia is really great in that it feeds each other. But I think the issue is that because we live in a very content driven and materialistic world, the work that I do isn't fashionable. So having to really lobby for change and also do the work in communities, I find that the biggest challenge is often having people to come together and collaborate in really scaling the impact, and really showing that this is life-changing work. You know, whether you're speaking to a group of 10 individuals or 1,000 individuals, that hour of the workshops that we do at Curate really allows people to see periods in a different light. And I think purely because of the taboos that exist within menstrual health, people still have this sort of hesitation to fully invest in eradicating period poverty. It's not to paint a bleak picture. There's obviously some organizations that have stepped up, thankfully, some organizations that we have collaborated with, but it's often treated as a thematic exercise. So we'll do something because it's menstrual hygiene day for one day, or we'll do
Mm,
something because it's Women's Month for one day. And what people often forget is that menstruation occurs every single month. So how can we really ensure that we are turning these initiatives to be sustainable? And I think as an academic, I am grateful for the opportunity to present different solutions, but it comes with its challenges. I've been in rooms where people have turned down the conversation around speaking around period poverty because they think that conversation doesn't deserve to be in public platforms. So any opportunity that I have, such as these, where I can speak publicly and really drive the message across to say that menstrual health deserves public attention because it is a human rights crisis, is a really great opportunity to expand the work that we're doing. So for me, it's really just for me, the real win is shifting the shame from, like, shifting the narrative from shame to power, and just getting any opportunity to do so, no matter how big or small the crowd is
yeah.
honestly the biggest blessing that I have.
Considering the fact that periods something that occurs every month, and as you shared that it shouldn't be something quite thematic, but as it is, we know on Wednesday it's going to be the day that really commemorates menstruation health. How would you like to close off our conversation tonight, considering what we have been speaking about?
Mm. Well, I dream of a world where, a girl before she has her period won't necessarily have to go through the same fear that I went through when I started my period. That she will feel confident and prepared because society feels confident enough to speak openly about menstrual health, but has also invested enough in menstrual education initiatives. I really dream of a period friendly world where menstruation is no longer a barrier to someone's ability to go to school. It's no longer an obstacle for someone's ability to go to work. I dream of a period friendly world where one has the access to period products in public spaces. So, in as much as we know when we go to the toilet, we know we'll see toilet paper, the same should be applied for menstrual products too. And I really do dream of a world where I think there's a shift within culture and the conversations around menstrual health, and that it is treated as an issue that isn't only given attention on a specific day, but is constantly spoken about because people who menstruate, especially people who experience period poverty, are going through these challenges every single month. So for me, that is ultimately what I envision, that we are seeing a holistic approach to tackling period poverty, but we're also seeing that individuals, whether it's dads, it's moms, it's teachers, it's religious leaders, are stepping up to speak openly about menstrual health and treating it like a natural biological function because that is what it is at the end of the day, period.
Period, no pun intended. But thank you so much, Candace, for joining us tonight and really giving us a different perspective around menstruation and really giving us insight in terms of what it would take for us to get there. Because we all think about getting there, but the actual steps of getting there is something that we're quite bleak on. And you've really given us a start. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers at home, that was in conversation on all things menstruation with our very own Minister of Menstruation, Candice Chirwa. Hope you guys did enjoy that conversation. But for now, unfortunately, we have to run to an ad break. We'll see you just after this.